So Nzinga, as I mentioned, she is the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the Hawks. She's responsible for developing and embedding diversity and inclusion throughout the whole organization. She's the first person to hold this kind of role in the whole NBA. Is it just the NBA, or is it maybe the whole professional sports scene? Because I don't think I've ever seen this in the NFL or any place else.
It's in all professional sports teams, not leagues, but teams.
She's also the member of the executive committee and provides guidance to the leadership team so that they can engender inclusivity and equality throughout the organization. Now, that's just a taste of it, but before she became the Chief Inclusion Officer with the Hawks, she served as a Senior Vice President, Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Edelman, the world's largest and most profitable public relations company. But I like this. She also worked in human resources for Essence Magazine, the Yankees. Any Yankees fans out there? And the National Football League. I could go on and on, but I guess we don't have a lot of time to do that. Okay. Feel like I mentioned him just a couple of minutes ago. I feel like I actually known him forever, just from TV, apparently. But
saying I'm old.
I was old as me, Jack. All right, so he spent 19 years in the NBA. There are not too many players that can say they spent 19 years in the NBA. He is a 7-time All-Star and a 2-time college NBA college champion with Duke. He is, there's some Dukies out there. This is really an interesting thing. Even when you just got into the league, you started your own company, Hill Ventures. It's a private company in which he has successfully invested in real estate. So this is like early on. You're already thinking about after basketball and you're just getting started. That's really cool. And of course, you've seen him on numerous NBA TV shows, appearances, TNT, NBA TV. But I think the most important one, maybe the most significant one, he is the husband of Tamia, 7-time Grammy-nominated singer, and the father of 2.
Yes, I overachieved.
But they did leave out one other significant thing. He was the guy that threw the inbound pass to Kristen Leitner in 1992, the Eastern Regional, beating Kentucky, one of the most historical games in college basketball history. I thought they should probably mention that too.
I agree.
Okay, so let me start with you, Graham, because I literally went through about 27 years and just encapsulated it. But when you were at Duke with the high top fade, getting ready to throw that pass, did you ever imagine or dream that you would actually be an owner in the NBA at that point?
Well, first of all, when I was at Duke, yes, I had a high top fade. And it certainly is not wise to be too trendy when you're young because you live to regret it when you're a little bit older. Because my fade was a high top, but it was a little off balance. Anyway,
I take it right now.
No, I think back then, I mean, I had no idea. I wasn't even sure that the NBA was a possibility. And, I was sort of in the moment, had a great time at Duke. It was a great experience playing for Coach K and my teammates and, going for and pursuing championships at that time. But, it was a lot different back then than it is now. The NBA wasn't sort of in your face and it wasn't as accessible. It was just a different time. College basketball was really big. And so, so being an NBA athlete wasn't necessarily on my radar. And definitely the idea or the concept of being an owner of an NBA franchise was not on my radar. And so, now, in saying that, my father maybe sort of directly or indirectly planted a seed. My dad played in the NFL, played back in the 70s and 80s, has worked in professional sports really since the early 80s with the Cleveland Browns, with the Baltimore Orioles, and for the last 20 plus years with the Dallas Cowboys. And, he tried unsuccessfully during the early 90s and even the late 80s to try and put together a group and buy a sports franchise. Tried with the New England Patriots in the 80s, the Bullets in basketball in the early 90s, and then the Cleveland Browns when they left, and then the NFL awarded them a franchise. So I do think that experience and sort of living through him planted the seed of possibility at a very young age. But in '92, with the high top fade, no, I was not thinking about. I was just thinking about completing the pass and making sure I stayed eligible for the next semester. That joke.
Yeah, Nzinga, I should mention that she is a proud graduate of Spelman College.
The president of Spelman College is in the room, Mary Schmidt-Campbell.
But we had to get that out there. But we just talked about you taking this position, the first of its kind in professional sport. When you were brought that opportunity, what were your first impressions of it? What did you want to do with it?
Well, it was a very unique situation, Brent, because at the time, the Atlanta Hawks were facing a public-facing racial crisis. And so I was a part of Edelman's organization. I was spearheading diversity and inclusion there. And I got a phone call from Alston and Bird, who happened to be one of Edelman's largest clients at the time. And they said, do you have time to come to our office? We'd like you to meet with someone who we think is a potential crisis client for you. And so I ended up meeting with Steve Koonin, who's the CEO of the Atlanta Hawks, and Scott Wilkinson, the general counsel. And I like to call this story turning a tragedy into a triumph, because at the time, they were facing really the toughest thing that they've ever faced in franchise history. They became aware that their controlling owner and their general manager had both been involved in trading emails regarding the African American fan base, disparaging fans, etc. And it all culminated in a board call in which the general manager at the time had said some disparaging things about a potential recruit to the team who was of African descent. And so the question for me was, can you help us? We think this is going to become public. We have to restore our reputation in this city. We are in the city too busy to hate. This is the home of Dr. King, and we just don't know what to do. And so I joined Steve and Scott in the executive committee as a crisis counselor to help them out of this awful travesty. And so while I was doing the work, I began to realize and recognize that diversity and inclusion could really be leveraged as part of their business moving forward and really be managed in a sustainable way if executed properly. And so one of my suggestions to the CEO was that he implement a CDIO role. I was not thinking about myself at the time, but I just recognized that this was low-hanging fruit and there was really an opportunity to create something for the NBA. The NBA had just been through this with Donald Sterling and the LA Clippers 2 months prior to the Hawks going through it. And so I wondered, is this a trend in the NBA? What can we do to fix it? And so when I made that recommendation, they ended up coming back and said, we're going to hire a CDIO. And then after some, long prayer sessions and talking with some mentors and really thinking about what the opportunity was, I told Steve I'm going to raise my hand and apply for that job. And he said, well, why would you leave your stable position at Edelman? You're doing well. You're helping us in the middle of a crisis. Why would you do that? And I said, because there's nothing but upside. We're at the lowest point that we can possibly be, and everything from here will be a win. And I want to be a part of that winning team. So that was my reason for joining the team and starting and getting involved in this work at the NBA league level.
That's great. The NBA is really interesting because it's one of the leagues, first of all, it's on the uprise. Numbers are going through the roof. But it's also a league that has been, I think, at the forefront of ownership. You had Bob Johnson, of course you had Michael Jordan, you had you. But they've also been at the forefront of having underrepresented minorities, blacks, go into head coaching positions, general manager positions. So it seems like the league is really good at leading some social change. When it comes to diversity and inclusiveness, what can other leagues, and maybe even outside of sports, other industries learn from some of the things that you guys have seen and what's going on in the NBA?
Well, I do agree. I think as a professional sports league, and let me qualify this answer by saying I'm not a huge follower of other sports. I'm all in the NBA. So, but at least from my vantage point, we are very progressive. And it starts with our leadership. It starts with former Commissioner David Stern, and our current Commissioner Adam Silver. If you look in the league offices, I think it really reflects diversity. Our Deputy Commissioner is a man of color. Kathy Behrens is one of the top league executives there and has a tremendous role and responsibility. So I do feel that it starts at the top. And, much like I feel our organization in Atlanta, we strive to reflect what Atlanta is. And Atlanta, as we all know, is very diverse. And I think the league does that as well. We have a very diverse customer base. We have a diverse diversity in terms of players. We have 25% of the players opening night this year who were born outside of the continental U.S. And that speaks a little bit to the game becoming a global brand. But I think the game of basketball in general, it really just kind of speaks diversity to me. And what I mean by that, I don't know if anybody here has played basketball. Anybody, just show of hands, played high school, pick up basketball. You go to the park and which I don't think people do as much anymore, but when I was younger, you'd go to the park to play basketball, and there might be 2 teams of 5 playing and 20 people on the sidelines waiting to play. And as a captain who might have the next game to play the winner, you're going to pick the best 4 players to play with you so you can win. The objective is to win. The objective is to be successful. And I don't care if they're black, white, brown, gay, straight. If they can help you win, I don't care if it's my best friend. If he's not good enough, I'm not picking him. And so, I just feel, I don't know, maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but I feel like that spirit sort of exists in our sport. It's one of the closest things to a meritocracy in that, it's about talent. And I really do believe that, and I can't speak to the past, I can only speak now to the present, but I do feel that our leadership gets that and understands that. And that's sort of the idea of our sport, of winning, of competing, and being successful. So as a league, as a franchise, we want to be successful. We want to be the best Atlanta Hawks organization that we can be. And it's almost kind of like, it's like saying, okay, with the Hawks, we're only going to hire people who live within 2 miles of the arena downtown. I mean, that would be foolish. You want to hire the best. I don't care where they're from. And so I think that sort of mindset, I'm proud. Not that, we don't have room for improvement, but I do feel like we, with the leadership of Zing and Tony Ressler and Steve Koonin, and collectively, that we're leading the way, not just in the NBA, but in professional sports, and that's something that we're very, very extremely proud of, especially considering what had happened a few years ago prior to Zing's arrival.
I also think that we have pulled this function out of HR where diversity traditionally lies and have done something very unique, which is to make it report into the C-suite, reporting directly to the CEO. And I think when business functions report into the CEO and have the responsibility of interacting across the board in the organization and really helping to drive revenue and helping to drive marketing decisions and things beyond administrative tasks, that's when the organization really takes the work seriously. And that's when people in the organization start to realize that this is something that's real. This is something that is championed from the very top, as Grant just said. And then also, I just remember when Grant became part of the ownership team, he and I had several conversations about the work that was going to get done and what our vision, what our long-term goals of his space were. And having him on the ownership team as a voice piece for this work was very important. I don't think a lot of sports organizations have people either in the C-suite or on the ownership level championing this work and being a voice piece to help their colleagues understand how this impacts business, how this impacts corporate culture, how it impacts community in the city, and just overall reputation. And so having someone like Grant at his level to understand this work, I mean, his mother, I've met her several times, Janet Hill, was a corporate executive in diversity for sports organizations before anybody knew what that meant. She was working at the C-suite level with the Dallas Cowboys and helping shape that organization from a recruitment perspective and figuring out how they bring in top talent in that organization. And so because he had an understanding and awareness of the function, and because he had that level within the ownership team, it was easier for me and became very helpful in order to get this stuff moving forward.
And I'll just add, piggyback on that. I do think like Adam Silver, I think really wants former players involved. And obviously a majority of players in the NBA are of color, but just to have that perspective on the ownership level. There's a certain perspective, whether it's with the rules committee, competition committee, all that sort of that role encompasses as an owner, to bring that perspective and understanding. He's been really bullish on that. And the great thing is the amount of money that a lot of these guys are currently making, and guys like LeBron James has talked about wanting to own a team at some point. I think you'll see more and more people of color in ownership positions, whether as a majority partner or vice chairman or minority partner, whatever role that might be. And you don't see that in other sports. You don't see that in football. There's very few. I don't want to say there's none, but so I think that's important. It's got to start at the top of the league. It's got to start at the top of an organization, as you said, for it to be credible with it. And Zing is she's involved in all aspects of our business in every department, and holds me accountable. Actually, as we walked in, she said, "You're not going to go in there with your beard looking like that today, are you?" And I didn't go to my barber today. I went afterwards. So yeah, she holds me accountable too, in more ways than one. But we need that. We need that, and we need her intellect. We need her understanding, her ability to connect with folks, and we just want to keep pushing the envelope.
Brings the perfect question around impact. How does these initiatives, how does inclusiveness, how does equality, how does that impact the Braves, the Hawks business?
Yeah, don't talk about the Braves.
No, the Hawks. How does that impact the actual business of the Hawks?
I think it impacts our business in many ways. And I'll just give you an example. I mean, we think about inclusion from a variety of perspectives. I think 9 times out of 10, when we're having a conversation about diversity and inclusion, people think we're talking about race, sometimes gender, and now starting to talk about sexual orientation. But we're talking about a lot of different things. We're talking about, families that may have some type of sensory need, like autism or PTSD, and figuring out ways to include them into our arena experience. We had just opened up a reimagined arena, State Farm Arena, as you all know, which the renovation was just finished. And so part of that is to include a sensory inclusion room for families that have this need, right? So that if your child happens to have autism and maybe your other children don't, you can still come to the game and have a great experience and be in the building. And so when you think about how that impacts business, well, that now opens up doors for people that have traditionally stayed away from sports. We think about the LGBTQ community, which is really low-hanging fruit in the Atlanta community. We're now the 3rd largest city for people that are openly out to reside here. We have the 3rd largest pride in the nation. We're the only sports organization in Atlanta to march in pride. And we've been doing it for 4 consecutive years, and we'll continue, and we'll build upon that, because the LGBTQ community has said to us, we need to know that there's a sports team that embraces us. And we will be loyal fans, and we will bring business, and we will engage in the ways that you want us to, but we just need to know that there are allies out there. And so I think really thinking outside of the box in terms of inclusion and how you curate experiences for new and emerging communities, and how you make whatever happens in our building very real for these different types of communities, that's how long-term business is created. We don't do it for the business, we really do it for the culture, and to make sure that the Atlanta Hawks brand is something that resonates, whether we're on the winning streak or the losing streak. It's got to go beyond wins and losses on the court. It's got to be a brand that resonates with people, so that they decide to spend an evening with us, knowing that we may not be the victors that night.
Grant, tell me something about that you learned about yourself being a co-owner as opposed to being a builder.
That's a good question. Well, I mean, I think, you know, I think you realize just how challenging it is when you have that responsibility. We're stewards of the franchise. You know, technically, to me, the fans, the city of Atlanta, this is their team. And we have a responsibility, to run it correctly. But as an athlete, I think sometimes maybe even as a fan, you think, well, if you do this, this, and this, it's easy, and sometimes you don't have that perspective or insight of just how hard it is. I mean, it's a tough business. It's a rewarding, it's fulfilling, it's engaging. I mean, it's everything you can imagine. And as someone who's been around sports and basketball my whole life, nothing I love more than being engaged with our basketball and our business. But it's incredibly challenging, and so it's humbling in a way, and so I do have a healthy sort of appreciation now, 3.5 years now as we've come in. But it is encouraging knowing that we have great people, and I feel like we have great ownership. We just have a great organization, and our job is really to empower them, help them establish a vision, and then get out of the way so we don't mess things up. And but it's I think for me, I don't know if I answered your question, but and having patience. I think that's another thing. As an athlete, you tend to be impatient, and even though you work every day, and sometimes but as an athlete, it's immediate results. You go out that night, that game, that practice, from possession to possession, you're keeping score. Literally and figuratively, you're keeping score. And as we sort of continue to build our business, it's like sawing wood, but it's making good decisions. It's hiring good people, empowering good people. And over time, I think you start to see that and see the results. It's not as immediate necessarily as an athlete, but so anyway, that's an interesting sort of perspective and change for me, because you're either good or you're bad on that possession, and everyone knows, but it's been great. I love it, and it's been extremely rewarding. And like I said, this is like family, and everyone who's a part of the organization and our team, I'm very proud of.
And Nzinga, what does success look like? What do you want to see a year from now, 2 years from now, when it comes to the inclusion in the Hawks, but maybe in general, and even in a broader perspective from the NBA, pro sports?
I think success is a journey. Oftentimes I get asked that question, and I think people want an immediate answer or an immediate change to occur. For me, I feel like we've already been on the trajectory of success, because we were, again, in a crisis, and now we're flourishing. Now we have so many different types of people in our organization that we have not traditionally brought on board as talent. You look at our executive committee, we are the most diverse executive committee in the NBA in terms of women and people of color who are at the C-suite level making business impact and change. Also within our community, I think we're making a huge difference. And success looks for me like our court renovation program that we started 3.5 years ago. We decided to look at the city of Atlanta and say, how can we make basketball a part of this city, right? How can we build bridges to the community through the sport of basketball? And we recognized that there were so many courts in the city that were just unused, or they're just damaged and just, not a great and a safe place to play. And so we decided through our Hawks Foundation that we were going to put money into the community by renovating these basketball courts, making them safe havens for kids, making basketball relevant beyond going to an NBA game, because sometimes NBA games are not accessible to everyone in the community. And so we recently heard from the Office of the Mayor that crime is decreasing in these areas where basketball courts have been renovated, because kids are now playing ball and doing things that are productive versus resorting to crime or doing something that is not productive. And so that is success to me. That is how we utilize our brand. That's how we utilize inclusion to bring folks together. We actually started a forum 4 years ago called Mosaic, and Grant happened to be one of our inaugural speakers. But Mosaic stands for Model of Shaping Atlanta Through Inclusive Conversations. We recognized that conversations around diversity and inclusion needed to happen and needed to be open to the public for us to start to uncover and unravel some of these hard conversations that were plaguing our city, like race and gender in sports, or how we utilize sports as a catalyst for social action. How do we understand what disruption looks like, and how do we become allies? All of these conversations have been taking place, and for me, success looks like us creating the unity game out of one of these conversations, and recognizing that if we leverage our brand and utilize other NBA brands in the same way, like the Cleveland Cavs when we played them and did this unity game, now we're starting to make movement in terms of race relations and ageism and sexism and all of these other isms that plague us. I don't think the Atlanta Hawks can cure all of these ills, but I certainly think that because our platform of sports is unique, we're one of those industries where you can pretty much get together a very unique, diverse group of people all in the same room, cheering and rooting for the same thing. You don't see that often. You know, I look around the arena sometimes at a game and I'm like, wow, look at this. You've got an array of colors. You've got black, white, Hispanic, Asian, old, young. You have people with some physical limitations. You've got gay, straight. I mean, the list goes on. And they're all cheering and rooting. And so if we can utilize our platform and use all of that energy towards coming up with solutions for some of these ills and move the needle, that's success. Not boiling the ocean. The ocean is a big body of water. It will never boil, right? And so I don't believe the Atlanta Hawks or the NBA or any sports brand can cure all of these things, but we certainly can make a difference. And so that's what success looks like for me.
That was great. I've been hogging all the time asking questions. But I think we're able to take a few questions from the audience. So does anybody have a question for Nzinga or Grant? Don't be shy. Yeah, the guy right there, he's definitely not shy.
I have a question just based on the NBA, but specifically about black women. Y'all been holding this down for the longest. It's been awesome. Just as a black man, I thank you so much for that. And I appreciate what the NBA is doing, especially when they call black women to handle things, okay? So you had something on and you had something happen, call a black woman. She gonna handle it.
And she went to spell.
Exactly. Even Mark Cuban had to call a black woman to handle something. So when I get is that you've been handling this for so long, what process that do you take in order to make that situation happen and bring us to all of us?
Yeah.
How is that process? What do you do? You know, some of the things that you had to prepare for making that happen.
Great question. And because you were the first person to ask a question, I'm going to get your business card and give you 4 tickets to a regular season concert.
You just give those things to me, I'll make sure they get you.
So when I started, I love the question. When I started my job on the very first day, I remember, you know, usually when you start a brand new job, you get flowers on your desk or some type of a welcome, warm welcome. My first day was very different. You know, I started and 2 hours later, the head of PR said, "You're going to be on the news today. So get ready because we have some interest groups that are picketing in front of Phillips Arena and they want to talk to you specifically about what you're going to do to fix all of this stuff that's going on. We've got the 100 Black Men of Atlanta out there, the National Coalition of Black Women. We've got the SCLC, the Rainbow Push Coalition. They want to hear from you today on your strategy." And so I recognized in that moment, and when I was faced with all of those different people that deserved answers, rightfully so, I said, there's no way I can do this alone. And so I thought back to my time at the NFL, and I recognized that we had a diversity council that was semi-productive. The reason that I don't think it was fully productive is because it was filled with people that worked at the NFL, right? So it was an internal-based group of people who were putting their heads together around issues. And so I said, well, the model is right, but probably not the execution. So let me use that model and then just tweak it a little bit to make sense for this city. And so I immediately started a diversity council, probably within 2 months of my job. making the council have people that worked at the Atlanta Hawks in Phillips Arena, because I recognized that we needed some, internal brain trust regarding what transpired, what was the culture like, what do we need to do to fix it. But I also needed to rely on the community. And so the other 50% of the members of the council were selected from the community directly, whether they were a sponsor or a season ticket holder or a small business owner or a clergy or an academic or someone who just didn't have money at all, who was unemployed but happened to be a fan of the game and didn't have discretionary funds to engage. We need to hear from all types of people across different demographics. And so when we became a working body, I relied heavily on them to help set the strategy for how we would do work. And so we actually worked in 3 work streams. And so when people say to me, well, what do you do every day? What does a day-to-day CDIO do? I would say 3 things. I focus on internal engagement, which is really all about the human capital experience. How do we find talent? Making sure that we're not poaching from traditional sports organizations like sports industries generally do, but looking outside of our industry at marketing, consulting, and new streams for innovative people. And then once those people come into the organization, how are we creating experiences for them to reach their maximum potential? So not rolling out cookie cutter leadership programs and management programs, but figuring out what does it take to bring out the best of each individual so that we can ultimately create high performing teams. The second thing that I do, and the second work stream that our council focuses on, is fan experience and external engagement. So that goes back to what happens inside of the arena. Did we make sure that tonight we curated a game experience that resonated with all of those different demographics that are in our building tonight, and not just really talk to one particular fan set? And then in the community, making sure that we're giving back and we're putting all hands on deck and working closely with community service-based organizations to give back. And then lastly, what we focus on is strategic partnerships, which I define as finding companies to do business with that are not usual suspects. So easy in Atlanta to do business with Coca-Cola, Home Depot, Chick-fil-A, UPS, big brands. But what about women and minority-owned and LGBT-owned businesses that can actually create value for our organization? And how can we make those type of opportunities come to life? So I think about building our practice facility. We partnered with H.J. Russell and Company, a Black-owned construction firm who did all of the project management for a 90,000 square foot facility in Brookhaven that we built in conjunction with Emory Medicine, first of its kind in the MBA. That's huge, that's groundbreaking. So yes, my job has many different facets to it. I do a lot of different things, but what I recognized in the beginning was that I couldn't do it alone. When you're facing a public crisis and people are upset and angry, whatever's in your head is not going to be enough to solve it. You've got to really get answers and really get guidance from people that understand all of these demographics that we serve. And so I believe in diversity in a truly holistic way.
Hey, thanks a lot. The work that you guys have done has been excellent work and really commendable. What advice would you give to technology companies who are struggling with the issue of diversity today?
Oh. I just answered this one, so I just looked at Grant okay, you want to take that one? I think that Grant and I said it best when we said it all starts from the top, right? So technology companies are just a mirror of who is running them, right? And so if technology companies are going to start to dimensionalize, we need to look at who are running these companies, how are they making decisions, and challenge the boards, challenge the ways that these companies are, even from the perspective of people who are customers or end users and doing business, we've got to challenge the system. Because right now the system isn't working, and it's oftentimes minorities and marginalized people are asked, how do we fix diversity and inclusion? How do we make it better? It's we're also a part of them. We're part of the marginalized community. It's really incumbent upon us to ask people that are at the top of these organizations that have access to the revenue and have access to the decision making. How do you become part of the solution? How do you drive this change? We know what the problems are, but we need you to utilize your voice. and you to utilize your hands to fix this. And so being in a room like this is very important. Oftentimes, we speak a lot to a lot of different audiences, but I will say when the power structure is in the room and when we have white men in the room listening to conversations surrounding diversity and inclusion and can get them to be champions of this work, that's when the needle will move.
Good afternoon, and thank you for all you do. And Grant, I've been a fan for a long time, so I'm just going to say that. But I do have a question. As individuals or business owners, how can we find out about either current or upcoming initiatives that we can either partner or support? And I'm especially interested in the health and physical fitness space.
All of these questions are like for me, right? I will say that if you're talking about the Hawk specifically, we do think about supplier diversity a lot. We do think about emerging businesses. Like I said, it's one facet of what we concentrate on. We try to have a very transparent process that is on our website. There are a lot of opportunities, especially through this recent renovation, where we have really been reaching out to different segments of the community to figure out who does what businesses are out there. Again, not just doing business with usual suspects, but really asking for you to put your bid in for business and be fairly evaluated for those opportunities. I think that people also in your space, because I'm assuming you're a small business small business owner, you also get involved with GMSDC, get involved with these organizations that at a national level have exposure and access to get you some of those contracts that you're looking for and network. I mean, I can't tell you how many nights a week I'm literally out and about just meeting people, shaking hands. There's so many free events and opportunities where you just need to meet one person that can make the difference, but you've got to put yourself out there, recognizing that you may not have brand recognition in the beginning. You may not have those relationships, so it's got to be grassroots work. I know that you are a business owner, but some of this stuff is grassroots, and you've got to start putting yourself out there in a way so that folks know what you do bring to the table. But in terms of the transparency, I would say go on our website and bid for those opportunities. It's not window dressing; it's real. And as I just told you with H.A. Russell and Company, people are actually winning those bids.
Do we have to wrap it up? Do we have to wrap it up? Okay, this has been great. Can we give them a round of applause? And I think we're done for the time being. We would want you to come back, I believe, at 1:45 for the next session. It's going to be great. It's going to be the president of Spelman, Dr. I want to make sure I say it right.
Dr. Mary Schmidt-Campbell.
Schmidt-Campbell. I always have a problem with Schmidt because I think Mike Schumacher. And Gary Brantley, who is the CIO of the City of Atlanta. So come back in this room at 1:45. Thank you.